that policy might change, for example. And that would be a big impetus to private investment. So these instruments are, we know them, they are guarantees, they are risks, they are quasi-equity instruments. A number, I mean, it's financial innovation to the extent that it amounts to using existing instruments in ways in which they have not yet been frequently used. So it's not financial innovation in the sense of creating new super complex financial instruments, not at all. These instruments exist, but the idea of combining taxpayers' money, public money, with private markets through these instruments is new. And it has been at least tested in some cases, but it's not common. And I think it should be the core of any public policy drive to try to engage the private sector in financing clean energy. So this table is not to be read because you can't read it, but it's just a list of available instruments to promote what is called blended finance. The idea of blended finance is a mix of public funds, taxpayers' money, and private investments. Now, if you think a little bit what this means, it means a total change in the conception of public policy. To do that, we need to equip our bureaucrats and administrations with a better understanding of risk, a capacity to analyze risk, a capacity to decide whether or not to subsidize the private sector and to do what. And there will be a big cultural change as well, because in many places of the world, including in my own country, subsidizing the private sector is not popular at all. And the idea that the private sector might advance collective goals is not popular at all. So we have to close that cultural gap if we want to engage the private sector, and this is something which I think is quite important. Let me say a few words about beyond renewable, because I think let's focus for 1 minute on electricity production. And suppose I'm able to extend the share of renewables, and particularly of variable renewables. Variable renewables are like wind and solar energy, renewables that are available momentarily, but the next moment they are not there any longer. So you need to have a system that is flexible enough to accommodate them when you can produce them, but to do without them when they are not there. And the point which I find very interesting is that if you develop the share of variable renewables in electricity production, it means indirectly that you have to have a system in which the non-renewable part of it is much more flexible. And I just found this graph, which is on India. It's a typical day in June in India in 2040. And this comes from a report from the International Energy Agency this year, in August 1 month ago, called Energy and Climate Change. And it is a load curve. So it shows how the total demand of electricity in one given day is met with the assumption that the whole India is interconnected. So there is no interconnection problem. And you can see that and this is a scenario which is compatible with, globally, with a scenario that maintains CO2 emissions under 450 parts, which is the limit compatible with a 2-degree increase in average temperatures. So on that graph, you see that solar energy, which is the orange part on the yellow part on the top, is actually augmenting almost up to take 40% of the total electricity production and consumption on that day, around midday. But this means that other sources have to disappear in less than 3 hours and then to come back as fast. And that's a tremendous challenge if you look at how plants work. In order to achieve that, you need also a lot of investment in the more conventional energy plants. Of course, there are sources of energy that are quite flexible. For example, hydropower, which is also renewable, but it's not a variable renewable in the same sense. Hydropower is very, very flexible. You can close almost in a duration of seconds. But it means that countries in which there is a lot of hydropower will be the most, and that's, for example, Canada or Brazil, are very, very, very well placed to develop renewables. In other variable renewables, in other countries, you will need a lot of investment across the energy system, of course, in terms of distribution and interconnection as well, but also in the efficiency and flexibility of existing plants. And this is something that requires a lot of attention. The second aspect of that flexibility will be demand-side measures. The way also to deal with that problem is to be able to control demand in a much more effective way. And most of the studies I could see argue that the counterpart to expanding the share of clean energy in our total energy balance will also have to be some measures on demand. The simplest measure on demand is, of course, efforts at energy saving and energy efficiency. But beyond that, there may be regulations to try to direct the demand into some specific time slots, for example, through regulations, through rules, through pricing, and so on. Let me end with a few concluding words. I think that engaging the private sector to invest more requires deliberate and consistent public policy action. This was one of the main messages I wanted to make. That requires more coherence and credibility in public policy objectives. That being said, I think there is a big road to take in using public finance not to invest, not to engage directly as much as in the past, but as a catalyst to promote information, to use innovative risk-sharing financial instruments to help build the market. And what is finally needed is consistency across the whole range of energy policy. In that sense, it's a system approach in which it's not enough to say, let's promote clean energy. We want to promote, and Amar already said that, we want to promote clean energy as part of a whole system which provides consistency of signals and of incentives. It means that in the end, we have a cultural, institutional, political, economic, educational building competences challenge before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pierre, for taking us through those market failure issues and what we can do to alleviate some of those resource allocation and risk sharing ideas to build the market. May I now request Ajay. Ajay, all of you know Ajay. He's now Director General of TERI, has been with the BEE. Not yet? Not yet. Okay. Will be Director General, apologize. Is at the Bureau of Energy Efficiency and, clearly, completely, deeply involved in India's strategies, especially on the demand side, and also involved in what was mentioned by both the previous speakers on, calibrating India's INDCs. Thank you, Ajay, for coming.
Thank you very much, Rajat. And thank you for inviting me to share my thoughts. But before I do that, I must share that, unfortunately, I am not an economist. And am, as some of my economist friends say, a ruddy engineer. What that has done to me is that my analysis tends to be much more empirical and data-based. So what I'd like to do is to share with you my feelings on what have we learned about scaling up private investments in clean energy infrastructure. In the context of particularly developing countries, but I believe it is as true of the developed countries, this is a story primarily of change. The reason why we are talking about this is because large-scale private investment does not happen. And what we want to do is to move away investment from current conventional energy infrastructure into clean energy infrastructure. What I'd like to do is to share with you experiences from 3 stories where this has happened. The first is the Indian wind energy story. The second is the story relating to a very efficient means of generating power from coal. It's called supercritical technologies. And the third is about LED lighting. Now, what have we learned? if you look at all of these three, and I'm going to spend a minute on each of them, no more. If you have questions, we can discuss them later. Today, we have about 25,000 megawatts of wind capacity in this country. It contributes about more than 5% of the energy generation in this country. All of it, 100% of it is private sector investment. How did this happen? All the issues that we think of when we think of climate change, whether it's a carbon tax, isn't there. Subsidies, those which exist today existed yesterday when wind happened. But yet this happened. And I think the question we need to understand is why. If you look at supercritical technology for power generation appeared in the late 90s. Amazingly efficient technology for a country like India, where the vast amount of electricity is from coal, it just made sense. But then, when we did the numbers, we found that the cost of electricity would be 25% more than if you did it from the less efficient plants. Did not make sense. Today, 100% of the electricity in this country is made from supercritical powers. 100% of the new capacity that is being added, and is being added for the last 3 years, 100% of it is supercritical. Nobody builds subcritical power stations now. Change has happened. Of course, now what happens is electricity from supercritical plants is 25% cheaper than for subcritical plants. What do we learn from that? And the third is the story of LEDs. Now, as far as LED lighting is concerned, it uses half as much energy to produce the same amount of light as a CFL. 1/10 as much as a normal bulb, the kinds you see here. In January 2014, if you went to buy an LED bulb in the market which could replace a 60-watt bulb, it costed 500 to 600 rupees. When we did a bulk procurement, it ended up costing us 310 rupees, substantially less. And what we did was created a public sector company, but with investment not from the government, but by 4 Navratna public sector companies. Why Navratna? They're subject to market due diligence. And therefore, a company in which they've invested is subject to the same commercial due diligence as a Navratna is. So it's a completely commercial company. And what they did, the model that they use is, for example, with the Delhi electricity companies, they got into an agreement and said, we will buy the bulbs, we will give them to you, and then you and I take our Delhi bills, go to a kiosk, and get 2 bulbs, or I think it's 4 bulbs now, for a price of today 93 rupees. If you haven't done it, do it. But how did it come to 93 rupees? 44, the quality is suspect. I mean, if you want, we can go into this in much greater detail. But the central point was that, on the one hand, this company, which we created, Energy Efficiency Services Limited, bought in bulk. Their first procurement was 0.75 million, the second was 2 million, the third was 3 million, fourth, fifth, and sixth were 5 million each. The price dropped from 310 rupees to 240 rupees, etc., down to 73 rupees. And so it can be given to a consumer at 93. At this moment, as we speak, this program is going on in 7 states, a large number of cities, and at any given time, you can find out what is the number of bulbs that have been sold. This is done in real time. And you can go onto a website, and I'm trying to see if I can load it, and see what is the number of bulbs that have been sold. This morning it was about 14 million. But it's updated every 30 seconds. These are the 3 success stories as far as clean energy infrastructure is concerned in India. These have happened. What do we learn? Well, one, clearly in all of these 3 cases is You need a business model in which people will make money. The point that Pierre made, they should know that they will earn a return on their investment. So whether it is EESL getting, or what I forgot to mention is that they give it to you, they give the LED bulb to you, and then the electricity company charges you 10 rupees in your bill every month for 9 months to recover the money. So again, we are paying for it in a manner that does not hurt the pocket too much. The savings every month is more than 10 rupees. And in the process, we are able to have a completely commercial venture. So the first issue is that who pays, how do they pay, and how is the payment determined? This is as true of the supercritical, where now in today's regulatory regime, the electricity regulatory regime, the price of electricity from the supercritical power station is computed by the regulator on the basis of coal costs, the cost of technology, etc., and the distribution company and the pays the generation company for what it costs. Similarly, in the case of wind, the regulator determines the wind costs. It's almost like it's like the European feed-in tariff. It's not exactly that, but it's like that. But the more important issue is that the Indian Electricity Act says that each distribution company has to buy a certain percentage of electricity that comes from renewables. Now, every regulator has to set what is the percentage. If I set it as very high, renewable energy is more expensive than, say, coal-based electricity, your bill and my bill will increase. If we set it at 0, doesn't help. So clearly, what the regulator does is some kind of a trade-off so that the pinch to your bill and mine is not too large. As prices come down, they increase the percentage. That increases volume, brings it down more, they increase the percentage. So over the years, if you see, various regulators have increased the percentage of electricity that they buy, that they ask the distribution company to buy. Now, the second issue is risk management, something again that Pierre spoke about. This is very important. Especially with new technologies, there are two risks that are happening. One is the risk of the technology itself. It's new, I don't know whether it will work. People in industries have told me, you know, the fellow came in, he brought something, a gizmo, and said, you put it in and your electricity bill will reduce by 50%. He says, but what if the entire plant closes down? I've got an operating plant, I'm making a profit, and this thing may just lead me to lose all my profits. So the risk that the consumer perceives on these newer technologies, and no matter what they are, is relatively high. We need a way to ensure that this risk is managed. In the case of the LED bulbs, what we said, ESL told the people they were buying the bulbs from, you have to give a no questions asked warranty for 3 years. If the bulb fails, you will change it. And they kept a certain amount of the monies to be paid to them as bank guarantees and so on. They've sold, as I said, something like 14 million LED bulbs till now. The number of failures have been 892. So you can compute the numbers. It's a very, very small number. And all those 892 have been replaced. In the case of the wind energy turbines and the supercritical plants, the manufacturer provides a performance warranty. Typically, it's a 1-year performance warranty. In the case of wind, initially it was a 2-year performance warranty. But the point is, so, you know, there have been cases when a wind energy turbine did not perform, and the manufacturer has paid the profits that the company would have made if the wind machine had performed. So what it does is it is comfortable for the investor to buy a new technology. Then comes the issue of commercial risks. Will I get paid either by by you and I as consumers or by the electricity company? This is a vexatious problem, because at least in India, the distribution companies are in the red. It becomes difficult to get to believe in the document that they sign. Will they pay me? Will they have money to pay me? This also has an impact on banks. If I'm going to invest, I go to a bank to take a loan, and the bank says, you're going to sell to the distribution company? The fellow will never repay your money. I'm not going to lend you money. And anyway, this is a new technology. I have no idea whether it will work. So banks are amazingly averse to financing of new technologies. Yet, they have financed LEDs, they have financed wind, they have financed supercritical plants. Now, having said all of this, in all developing countries, including India, there is a very large set of opportunities to invest in. If I am an investor, my pockets have a certain amount of money. I can invest it in these new technologies with all these risks. I can expand my business in whatever I'm doing. I know it will work using the same technology. I could make something else, soap, for which the technology is well known. In other words, money is fungible. How do I attract it into this sector? If we look at these three programs, what is clear is that people invested because there was some quote-unquote higher goal. The LED program is the PM's flagship program. At every opportunity he gets, he talks about the efficiencies, he talks about the fall in prices. People are proud to be associated with it. If you look at the wind energy program, our wind energy manufacturers wave their wind energy credentials across the world. They're recognized the world over. They get all kinds of prizes. It helps if this kind of a recognition is there. So to end, what is it that we can do learning on these experiences? One of the things which I think is very important, worked in all the three cases, was repeated bulk procurement. So industry, which is going to manufacture the goods, knows that you're going to buy large numbers, you're going to buy them again and again. They invest in technology. And when you do repeated procurements, prices come down. It's not just the size of one tender that brings prices down, it's prices fall as there are subsequent tenders. I've seen in these three cases, for example,